Lesson 10. The Small Woman. Gladys Aylward, a former London parlour maid, left for China in October 1930 with the determined ambition of becoming a missionary. After many appalling experiences with Japanese soldiers, she took 100 homeless children over the mountains and across the Yellow River to Sian to protect them from the advancing Japanese army. At sun up, the young children were up and shouting, running around the courtyard, throwing their bundles of bedding at each other, playing tag, and generally behaving in the normal way of young children all over the world. With the aid of the older ones, Gladys tried to sort them out and feed them. There were nearly 20 big girls, ages varying from 13 to 15, ninepence and Sualan among them. There were 7 big boys, aged between 11 and 15. The rest of the children varied from 4 to 8, wild, undisciplined, laughing, weeping, shouting little brats. In vain, she tried to tell them that they must save their energy for the long day ahead. She might just as usefully have told a stream to stop running. The 2 coolies from the Mandarin, carrying their shoulder poles, a basket of millet suspended at either end, arrived at the front gate. Gladys said goodbye to the 2 mission workers, to several other friends collected there, and after one last look around the broken inn, they were on their way, the children scampering ahead, dodging back through the gates of the city, shouting loudly that they could walk forever and ever. They followed the main trail southward of several miles. Gladys possessed a whistle which she had obtained from a Japanese soldier months before, and she blew it occasionally to call the more adventurous little boys down from outcrops of rock, and twice to line them all up in rows for a roll call to see that no one was missing. They stopped by a stream to boil millet in the iron pot which Gladys carried. She heaped the steaming grain into the basins as each child came up in turn for its helping. At the end of the serving, there was not much left in the pot for her, and from that moment onward, that was the way things usually turned out. The children, revived after the meal, began to clamber about the rocks again and made excited forays ahead, to lie in wait and ambush the main party. She gave up trying to keep them in order, but as the afternoon progressed, these minor expeditions became fewer and fewer. Thus soon she had 4 small ones hanging onto her coat, protesting that they were tired, and could they all go back to Yangtze now. Gladys took turns with the older boys to carry them. She felt a little tired herself. It was getting dark when they came to a mountain village which she knew and where she thought they might find shelter for the night. She knew that no householder would be anxious to keep 100 noisy, dirty children. Help came from an unexpected quarter. An old Buddhist priest in his bright saffron robe stood on the steps of his temple. "Where are you going?" He called to Gladys. We were refugees on the way to Sian, she said. He came down the steps and approached her, his small eyes almost lost in the maze of wrinkles and lines that creased his face. But what are you going to do with all these children, woman? He sounded most disapproving. I am looking for a place to sleep tonight. Then you can stay in the temple. All my brother priests are away. There is plenty of rooms. Tell them to come in, he said abruptly. The children needed no prompting. This was something like an adventure. It was dark in the temple. They crowded around the iron pot when Gladys had finished cooking the millet. And when they had eaten, they curled up on their bedding and went fast asleep. She did not sleep easily. For one thing, the temple was alive with rats, and a small creeping doubt had entered her mind concerning the wisdom of starting this journey with so many small ones. Perhaps she was overestimating her ability. It was one thing to journey through the mountains alone, quite another to take 100 children. They were far from any village when the next night caught them, and they huddled together in the shelter of a semicircle of rocks out of the wind. In the night there was a heavy mist, and the children crept under their wet kilts, and next day they steamed and dried out when the sun rose. That afternoon they met a man on a mule traveling in the same direction as them. If they would come to his village, he said, he would be glad to find them shelter for the night. She accepted his offer gratefully. In his courtyard, the children spread themselves out and scooped cooked millet out of their bowls until their bellies were full, then drank cupful after cupful of the hot twig tea. They still thought it was all a wonderful adventure. How many days will it take us to reach the Yellow River? A day, asked Sultan diffidently. Although Gladys had never been through to the Yellow River, she knew the answer to that question without any trouble. The muleteers on the normal track used to take 5 days. We are going right through the mountains. About 12, I would say. And we shan't see a single Japanese soldier the whole way, asked Ninepence. I hope not, she answered. She looked at the two girls as they chatted, the girl she had bought for 9 pence and the slave girl from the Yamen. They were both exquisite little creatures with clear pale skins and blue-black shiny hair. Even in their dusty padded coats, their prettiness was still unimpaired. She thought wistfully how beautiful they would look in the ceremonial robes of China, wondering if they would ever know such luxury. How absurd that they should be forced to make this long journey to save their lives. She felt an unreasoning anger at the stupidity of all men that they should be the cause of this ordeal. The next 2 nights were spent in the open. Two of the older boys, Ta and Liang, had obtained a pot of whitewash from a village along the way, and they went on the ahead, daubing a splash of white onto the rocks to mark the trail across the mountains. Sometimes they would write a text across a rock. This is the way. walk you in it, or fear ye not, little flock. There were sequels of appreciation as the messages were translated to the young ones. This was new country to Gladys, but she knew they were heading south by the directions of the sun. They were thirsty practically all the time, for the sun was hot and wells were only to be found in the villages. After the heavy wet mountain mist, each morning they would gather around any drip from the rocks and moisten their tongues. The millet was used up now, and the carrier went back to his village. They had no more food, and the mountains stretched ahead of them, wild and barren, with few places of habitation. Often, when they climbed over virgin rock, the slopes were so steep that they had to form a human chain down the mountain side and pass the younger children down from hand to hand. They cried when they fell down and cried when they got tired. Often Gladys tried to rally them with a hymen, and when they reached a level patch of ground, they would all march bravely along singing the chorus. Between them, the older children and Gladys were carrying practically all the bedding now, and often they would give one of the 5 or 6 year olds a pick, a back, ride for a short distance. There was rarely any moment when a small hand was not clutching at Gladys' jacket. 7 nights out from Yangcheng found them camped in the heart of mountainous region unknown to her. They had found a small trail which led southward. It was not yet dark, but everyone was too exhausted to move further. The thin homemade cloth shoes which everyone wore were practically all worn out. The big girl's feet were cut and bleeding. Everyone was filthy, covered with dust and dirt. They had no food. Gladys raised her head to scan the party lying in huddled groups under the rocks. She did not like what she saw unless they received food and help very soon. She was afraid of what might happen to them. Suddenly, she saw Tay and Liang, who were still acting as forward scouts, running back toward her. They were shouting something which she could not hear, but their obvious excitement presaged danger. Man, they shouted, soldiers! Gladys froze in a moment of panic. She put her whistle into her mouth to blow the prearranged signal for the children to scatter, but she did not blow it. If they scattered into this wild terrain, they might all be lost and would starve or die in the wilderness. And then, as the boy stumbled toward her, she saw men in uniform rounding a buttress of rock down the valley, and with a gasping sigh of relief realized that they were nationalist troops. The children had sighted them also. Their tiredness fell away and they bounded over the rocks to greet the newcomers. Gladys, with the girls, advanced more slowly, and as she walked suddenly heard the sound she dreaded more than any other. The noise of aircraft engines with a thunder of sound that echoed throughout the valley. Two Japanese fighters tore through a cleft in the mountains and hurtled across their heads. Although they must have been hundreds of feet up, their sudden appearance, the abrupt bull roar of their engines, sent a shock wave of panic through everyone in the valley. She threw herself into the shelter of a rock, glimpsing from the corner of her eye that the girls were doing the same. She crouched rigid, waiting for the rattle of machine guns. None came. She looked up as the planes disappeared, catching sight of the stubby wings, the rising sun insignia painted on the fuselage. But the airmen were obviously intent on something more important than machine gunning. Nationalist troops or refugees in the mountains. Gladys stood up and looked down the valley. The children had been well trained on their drill in the event of attack by aircraft. They were scrambling up from their hiding places. The nationalist troops, who had also scattered wildly, were mixed up with the children. They rose from the rocks, laughing together. There were about 50 soldiers, reinforcements from Honan passing up country to join a nationalist force further north. Gladys met the young officer in charge and explained their predicament, but the problem of the hungry children was being solved spontaneously. Soldiers were diving their hand into knapsacks and bringing out treasures of sweet foods, and all around she could hear only the uhs and ohs of the delighted children. The soldiers decided to camp in that spot for the night. They invited Gladys and her brood to stay with them and share their food. It was a feast. They had foodstuffs not seen in Shansi for years. The children sat around the small fires, stuffing themselves to bursting point. Even Gladys, for the first time on the journey, ate her fill. When the troops moved on at dawn, the children waved them a sorrowful goodbye.